All right, welcome to Bungalows for Bachelors number 8. We are going to talk about permitting today, and this is going to be um, sort of a more controversial topic because it's just by nature, not everybody agrees on why it exists, how it's supposed to be used, and all those things. So we'll see. Should be juicy. Let's get right into it. Let me share my screen, and we'll get right in. All right, so still in phase one pre-construction. We're going to talk about permitting. We got one more topic after permitting, procurement, and then we will actually start talking about what to do to property to get stuff starting to build. So, what is a permit? Well, the formal definition that I thought of was it's a formal approval by a governing jurisdiction to engage in construction activities. The basic premise is I own a house. I want to build something, let's say, in my backyard. And depending on where I live, I may or may not be subject to certain rules. And a permit is the approval from said entity that I need approval from that I'm allowed to do this thing. It's usually, it can be a paper. You can put the paper up on your door or wherever on the job site. You physically display this usually. But that's what a permit is. So why do permits exist? Well, the short answer is money. Um, but the long answer is that in the olden days, before there was tons of permitting and stuff going on, there was an older method of construction where somebody was an owner of a project, they wanted to build something. And if they weren't going to build it themselves, then they would find a builder. Now, they would find a builder based on word of mouth or other methods, but the basic premise is that this person who's going to build you your house is someone who's going to be responsible for it and accountable for it. And the owner builder relationship was something very carefully selected so that you don't get screwed, basically. And that's just sort of the way things, kind of used to go. And you get to a completed project by just working with each other and, money flowing from the owner and everything. Nothing crazy complicated there. It's just, you want something built, you're going to find somebody who's going to do a good job and you're going to hold them accountable to the good job, and that'll be that. Now, the current method is a little bit different. There can still be people who have cash, who have a lot of money to do projects. They can still find good builders they trust, and they can still do these things. It just depends on the situation. Most of the time, though, if you are going to build something large scale like a house, most people can't just pay cash for the house to be built. So they're going to get a bank involved. Well, as soon as you involve a bank, you're involving the bank's risk because they're going to fork out a whole bunch of money for something that is more risky than just a house. Because if they give a mortgage on a house, the house exists, it's already there. If they want to give out a loan on construction, there is no actual valuable thing. As they're paying out to get this house built, let's say they're halfway through or something, and they got this empty shell that's a dried in building, and they like quit building or something, and they fail, the bank can't just sell half a house. They have to finish building the house, or there's something else has to go on. Someone's getting sued or something like that, most likely. But it is not as simple. So, in order to make sure all these things happen, there's a big, big system of checks and balances. So, and it's not all because of banks, but a decent part of it is. So, a bank is going to use the governing authority system to make sure that the builder is building a house properly and that they are building a house to codes and things like that. So you can see how all the arrows are just kind of going everywhere on this side. And that's because it really is a mess. I mean, you've got engineers that are going to get involved, inspections are going to get involved. There's just a whole lot of extra steps in here that are all about the bank reducing its risk so that the project can be built and nobody's going to lose a ton of money. So that's sort of a rough reason. But at the same time, what do permits do for, let's say, a city you're going to build a house in? Well, it's an income source. I mean, If I'm going to go put a fence on my backyard, more than likely I'm not going to end up, creating a hazard to the public by building a fence. It's not about safety. It's about, okay, well, we want to tell you that you're allowed to build your fence. So pay us our $30 permit fee. And then you can go build your fence. It's like, okay, it's an income method. And there's nothing, necessarily unethical about that depending on your position, but it is the way it is. So who grants permits? Well, any governing jurisdiction that the property for construction is in is going to be subject to. So the smallest category of that usually refers to an HOA. So in a lot of new subdivisions, a lot of them are governed by a homeowners association that is effectively usually legally responsible for certain things, like keeping the trees on the main road trimmed or keeping the road paved, depending on if you're out in the county or something like that, or maintaining the community pool. There has to be some entity involved to manage this. And they also manage a lot of things that have to do with the houses themselves. Frequently, if you're building in an area with an HOA, you have to go to them, their architectural review committee, and show them your plans. And if they don't like the way your house looks, they're either going to tell you to change it or they're going to tell you you can't build here. And they are legally allowed to do that because that's the way it is. So you want to make friends with people that are on the board so that kind of thing doesn't happen. But that is the smallest entity is just pretty much your neighbors. It's a group of your neighbors. The next biggest is normally like a city, and it's the same principle here. I mean, you are living in a city that has underwater, power, water, sewer infrastructure. It's got streets, it's got roads, it's got all this stuff to maintain, and you want to benefit from access to those features. So therefore, you got to follow the rules of the city that you're in. Same thing applies to a county, but usually counties are less stringent. They are more concerned with actual either danger, fire, or waste. A lot of times if you're out in the county in Texas, you're probably only going to get a septic permit. Sometimes you're going to get a driveway permit to make sure that the culvert you put for your driveway at the road is the right size or something. But it's really very, very minimal. There's not a ton of governmental involvement, both because the governments are much smaller and also because it's just there's less stuff to check. So another group that could be giving out a permit for you, that probably wouldn't be for you because we aren't all developers, but for those who do develop large pieces of land and cut them up into small lots, if they're going to build roads and install sewer mains, water mains, that kind of stuff, electrical power poles, all this stuff that's going to be built, then they need actual permits from those services. For example, in San Antonio, SAWS is the water purveyor for most of San Antonio. If you're going to be buying a big lot in San Antonio city limits and you're going to cut it up, develop it with some streets and roads and you're going to extend water mains and stuff like that, then you need permission from those who own the water mains, which is SAWS, the water purveyor, San Antonio Water Services. You need a permit from them showing how exactly you're planning to connect it, where you're going to route your lines, all this stuff. You got to follow all their rules so that their water mains are, good. And that's how the water main system grows. It's actually developers are paying for all this uh, expansion of city infrastructure and passing that cost off onto the homeowner, of course. But yeah, so those are other examples. Um, Water quality commissions. Usually, there's some kind of um, protective commission for literally water quality, and that basically means like runoff from streets or runoff from construction. They're trying to make sure that you're not polluting and getting a bunch of nasty stuff out into the natural water sources that we have that we drink out of and all this stuff like that. So, and this above the San Antonio area, there's the Edwards Aquifer. So there's a commission called the Texas Commission of Environmental Quality or something like that, and they govern a lot of control over stuff that's construction in the Edwards Aquifer area. Um, so you have to get a permit from them if you're going to build pretty much like big. They're more for developers too. Like if you're just building a house, like you're basically already accounted for in other math. But if you're a big developer, you're going to do a whole bunch of land clearing, a whole bunch of soil upheaval and removal. Like, when things rain, a lot of this stuff can be carried off site. So there's a lot of approvals you need to get if you're in a special area. And then, of course, you can deal with state roadways. Again, that's more of a developer thing. But if you happen to buy a lot, it's like a larger acreage and it's on a highway, and you're in Texas, for example, you will need to get a TxDOT driveway permit in order to basically build your driveway on your land and then cut the Texas road so that you join the road the proper way. So there's different people who can give out permits. But the basic premise is they have authority because of where you bought something and you need to get their permission. All right. The ultimate question. Do I need a permit? Well, that depends on a few things. First of all, you got to know the land and its rules. When you are looking for land to build something on, or even a house to live in, either way it applies, there are rules set in place based on the benefits you get by buying in that area. Most of us were born in the United States, so we're kind of born into this country that we live in, so we deal with the country's rules. The same thing applies to counties, cities, states. If I want to go live in, California, I am understanding that I will live by the rules of California. And that's a choice I make when I go to live there. If I want access to like the nature and whatever it is that they have there or something, and I specifically want that, then I am going to understand that I play by those rules. So, you know, that's you gotta be willing to accept the rules of where you're going, and that works for cities, counties, you name it. San Antonio is a very permit heavy city, even for the dumbest little things. But if you want to live there because you want to have access to the Riverwalk, then just be aware those are the laws. Not necessarily that you have to follow them, but they are there. And if you want to live legally and ethically and all these things, then okay, you know, you got to be aware of that. So technical legality. So, like I said, when you purchase land, you sign an agreement containing rules regarding its use. Deeds can have lots of restrictions in them. They can have call outs for, referencing like plat documents that say, hey, by the way, you have these easements and these things on your land. You can't use it for this. You can't use it for that. So when you actually buy the land and sign the documents, you need to read all the documents because there are rules you have to follow, and that's often contained there. Right. Responsibility and accountability. So there can be benefit to using the permitting system. And that benefit can be that for larger projects, when you're getting permits, those permits are often tied with inspections. They're often tied with a third party that's not concerned with your project, but they want something built properly to code, and they want something built well. They're going to basically be backing your project. So if you basically get a permit for a plumbing modification or something to happen, and then contractor comes in and like does a terrible job, then you have that city's basically permit and authority behind making sure things get done correctly and fixed. And you can say, no, you didn't do a good job. You can write into the contract agreement with that contractor that if they don't pass the inspection, they fix it until they do. So it can be a good thing. It just depends on what you're doing. Something else to think about is enforcement. So let's say I decide to not get a permit to build a shed in my backyard when I know that I needed to, depending on the size of the shed or something. What are the odds of being deported? Well, do you know your neighbors? What kind of area do you live in? Are you in a state where people are generally more uptight and want to know the rules? Are you in a county where no one's going to care what you're doing? When you buy land and you start building things, people tend to care because they're usually going to be around the noise, around the dirt, around the construction. They're going to be affected by it in some way, most likely. So most of the time, people care in some way. Um, and the other thing to consider is the future sale value. So if you build something and you didn't get permitting, and it was definitely a situation where you should have, there are very likely things that can come up in the disclosure statements and things like that that can bite you in the butt, where you're selling the thing and the form says, oh, I got permits for any permitting for any things requiring a permit. That's it can be a checkbox on a disclosure statement. If you lie, then you are, going down a whole other rabbit hole of you're going to get in trouble potentially. So like that can kind of bite you. So it really depends on you got to know your rules. You got to know what the potential things are. So, future sale value and effectiveness can be affected if you know, don't follow those rules. So it's kind of these are things you should juggle when you're thinking about getting a permit or not. And of course, repercussions. What is the worst case scenario when your project is discovered if you did not get a permit? So you got to think about basically what can they do? Well, ultimately, your land is in their jurisdiction. They could do whatever they want to correct the situation. If, for example, you build something and they come in and they say, well, we don't have a plumbing inspection. We need to know these pipes are good. They may tell you to tear all your sheetrock off. They could tell you whatever. If you build a structure that may not be safe by their standards, you think it might be fine. They can tell you to come in and tear it down. If you build a shed in an easement for land dedicated to a utility power company that come by and work on a pole and your shed's in their way, they can tell you to tear it down or move it. You have to be aware of what the potential repercussions might be when you're considering a permit. So let's say you want to be the responsible, good national citizen and you want to get a permit. So what do? Well, the first thing is you got to know what kind of potential type of permit you are going to get. Um, Most of the time, if you're going to do something on an existing house, you're going to know what it is you're trying to do. Am I trying to replace my windows? Am I replacing my siding? Am I replacing my roof? Am I having a plumbing modification done? Am I tearing out a wall? These things are look like normal categories of things that are done to a house. Am I building a fence? Stuff like that. Most new construction is its own like permit set because it's going to have a whole bunch of other stuff in it. They're going to check structural stuff with an engineer or an inspector. They're going to check plumbing. They're going to check electrical. They're going to check HVAC. They're going to check all kinds of stuff when you're building new homes. So like that's a different, usually permit type. Are you doing site work only? Am I not ready to build a house yet? And so I don't want to pay for the permit and get that ball rolling because I'm not ready. Maybe I just want to do some grading on my lot and like dig some trenches and do something. It's just site work. Get my utilities buried or something like that. You can get a permit for that. So um, that can matter because permits are usually time locked somehow. When you get a permit for something, it's usually on the timeline. They say you have 6 months to accomplish this work. Otherwise, if you don't, you need to either extend your permit or get a new one, basically. So that can matter if you don't have things timed well. So roof replacement, mechanical, electrical, plumbing changes. These are types of permits you can get. So you want to check with your local potential jurisdictions to see if one might be required. Like I said before, HOA, city, county, those are going to be some pretty basic ones for most people, even for new construction. The exception might be like Edwards Aquifer water recharge areas or special water resource areas. And most of the time people are going to know and you're going to hear about it somehow. Frequently when you're buying land, this stuff's already been figured out by somebody and they might pass that information off to you. But check with them, look at their websites, give them a phone call, and go visit their office. And those are pretty much the ways to figure out what you need to do. If you're at a total loss, going to their office is pretty much the best bet because you do got to wait in line and do your thing, but you're going to meet real people, and occasionally you'll get a grumpy government worker, right? Because it's a government job and that kind of thing. But most of the people at a development services office want you to achieve your thing. They want you to build your thing because if they do that and they get the permit, one, they get money. Two, they're growing the value of the area of the city. It's good for everybody. They're spending money. It's good for everybody. So they want these projects to happen. Permitting isn't supposed to be this barrier that keeps people from successfully doing their projects. Yes, it costs money, but it's meant to improve in general, all kinds of stuff. So yeah, you can just follow the guidelines laid out by any requirements you find for what it takes to do your permit. So like I said before, an inspection is going to come with a permit, usually, sometimes it doesn't. But the inspection is basically, they're making sure that you did what you said you were going to do and what you didn't do, what you didn't mention, or anything like that. So they are going to check to make sure that your work is, let's say you Well, I mean, if you're building a house, then they're going to be inspecting pretty much everything. There's going to be a structural inspection to make sure the house is framed correctly. There's no unaccounted for loads. There's no crazy problems. Things aren't going to fall down. Um, which are those are important inspections because framers oftentimes get things wrong. And electrical inspections, make sure there's no misproper wiring things. Things aren't causing issues. Plumbing, make sure the plumbing isn't going to leak. Test it with the pressure. All these things. There's all kinds of ways this is all done, but those are just examples. So they're going to make sure everything is to code by the International Residential Code and any local codes that have been, kind of modified from there based on where the city is and what people have decided. But they're there to make sure that the house is going to be built properly. What they are not there for is to make sure that it was built in a way that looks nice or in a way that matches your plan. That, like, oh, they put a wall in the wrong spot. They're not going to care. The wall is structurally sound, so no big deal. That's not what they're there for. So the inspection is the follow-up piece that releases you from the liability usually. Um, if the it can get a little messy when you involve potentially an engineer. So, for example, going to get a house framed. I have a framing plan from an engineer. I can either have the engineer come out and inspect it, or I can have the city come out and inspect it. Both are capable of passing me and allowing me to move forward in my project. I'm going to have to pay the engineer because it's a business and he's got to pay the engineer for their time. The city, those inspectors are paid for in your taxes. So they are government workers. So they are sort of free, but they're also their price is built into the cost of the permit that you paid for. So, there's nothing's really free, but would you rather basically pay the engineer extra or have an inspector come out from the city for free? Just depends on what you want. The engineer is going to be checking, they're going to be a lot more familiar with the plan, especially if they designed it because they designed it. So they're going to have a better idea. An inspector is basically going to come out and look at the plan, see if there's anything crazy in there, make sure that's done right, and make sure the house is done correctly. These people look at a lot of houses and a lot of things. They are very familiar with this kind of thing, and they're going to be able to just get a good idea. So that's the inspection. So if you'd like to learn more about this, there's pretty much not any books written on the subject, and not many people talk about it on YouTube or anything. So this is something that you really only learn by doing. So you can figure out where you are, look at your area, go online, see if you can find out. Let's say, you know what, I'm going to build a shed in my backyard. Can I just build a shed in my backyard? And we're going to go through two examples right now just to show you some things. So I'm going to continue to share. Exit here, go to Chrome, and let's see. Look, my words on my local searches. That's kind of weird. But you can see what I've been looking up lately. All right, let's go to Bel Air, Texas. Permitting. Bel Air is a city in Houston. And it's where all the super rich people live. So there's usually where the rich people live, there's more permitting and there's more requirements and things like that. So I want to find out if I could build a shed in my backyard. I live in the city of Bel Air. Let's see what happens. So there's a contact for development services. I don't really want to do that. Frequently asked questions. When is a permit needed to do work or have work done on my property? Easy. Click on that link. Okay, when is a permit needed to have work done on my property? Here's your answer right here. With the exception of painting and small cosmetic projects, a permit is required prior to beginning work. If you are not sure whether you need a permit, you can call us. But this pretty much answers it. I mean, this is pretty specific. The answer is yes. For everything you want to do, doesn't matter what it is. You want to build a picnic table in your backyard, get a permit, right? So this is kind of what you deal with when you live in fancy, rich areas. And then I'll give San Antonio another example. San Antonio permitting. Let's say I want to build a shed in my backyard. How do I figure it out? So there's online services, permits and licensing. Let's try that. All right. Build SA is their online portal where you can find all kinds of stuff, garage sale and residential permits. Oh, well, residential permits is kind of what we need here because we are residential. Let's see, garage yard sales, permit, garage sale. Let's see. This isn't helpful. All right, so I'm going to go to the residence tab up here. Try again. Let's see. Garage sale permits. Okay, let's try it again. Let's go back to Google. This is part of the searching around. Services. Okay, focus on online portal is not what we need. Constructing in San Antonio. Residential constructing. Oh, this looks different. Here we go. Oh, here we go. Okay. So, uh, permit application. So there's descriptions here on what is what, but if you keep reading, you'll find this no permit required list right here. Boom. Click on that. That's what I'm looking for. Here's their list. 1 story detached accessory structures used as tool and storage sheds, playhouses, and similar uses, provided the floor area does not exceed 300 square feet. So that means if I build a shed under 300 square feet in San Antonio, I do not need to get a permit or playhouse or whatever. So they have a bigger list here, so you can do more things theoretically. But these are just 2 examples of where you go to find this kind of information and what it normally would read like. So that's that. That concludes the Bungles for Bachelor's number 8 on permitting. I hope you all learned something.